afternoon. Hello, Ant. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you.
Good. Welcome, everybody, to this month's LinkedIn Live. We are live on restreaming on YouTube and on Facebook as well. Fantastic to have you here joining us. And also to those people who are listening back on Spotify to the audio files afterwards. I also know that lots of people watch this back in their own time too, so thank you very much for coming back and reviewing. We're here today to talk about psychological safety. Safe spaces and bold ideas, really strong words there that we're going to delve into. We've shared some latest research and evidence-based data from the CIPD. Please check in the comments for that link. There's a fantastic report there that gives more detail about the research behind what psychological safety is, the difference between that and trust, why it's so important right now. So today, Ant and I are going to be talking about psychological safety. What is going on? Why is it such a hot topic right now? What are the dilemmas that people are facing in their organizations in terms of understanding it, making sure that they're creating psychological safety, making sure that they are thinking ahead to what might be needed for the organization's strategy? So, Ant, where are we going to start? We've got so much to talk through.
Yeah, we always run out of time as well, which is often a good thing because we can roll over into the next one. I think this is a big topic,
Yeah.
but it's a really important one. And also, I was thinking, maybe we don't do what I see a lot of people do, which is still talking about the concept and the theory of psychological safety. We've sort of seen that. We've shared a lot of resources on that. Read our blog, listen to other videos, and the report from CIPD is obviously a really good resource. But maybe today we can touch on, how do I create psychological safety when I'm managing performance, and balancing what that looks like and seeing what people are doing wrong, what organizations are doing wrong, because there's a lot of talk around psychological safety. And there has been for an awfully long time. So why are we still talking about it and what's going wrong there? So maybe some really practical things to get into.
That's a good idea. And I'm also hearing a lot of people saying to me, but everything we're creating, everything we do is creating psychological safety. So why are we focusing on it as like a targeted intervention? I think that's probably a good topic to get through too. So this morning I'm dialing in from Houston in Texas, over in the USA. I would love to hear where all our viewers are dialing in from. Please do say hello. Let us know where you're calling in from. It's lovely to hear and to see. Ant, you are in the UK today?
Yeah, in not so sunny Brighton, which is normally a nice south part of the UK that's nice, bright and sunny. But yeah, never mind.
Okay, well, it's lovely to connect across the different time zones as well. And I know we often have a very large global audience because of the topics that we're discussing. So psych safety is coming up in pretty much every single conversation I'm having at the moment with chief people officers, with HR leaders, with CEOs. Because it's in the media, because people talk about it, the hype then builds and people start to reflect back on, oh gosh, we are creating psych safety, aren't we? That is part of our people strategy, isn't it? We're people first. Of course, that's what we do. And then I'm getting some organizations say to me, yeah, but do you know what? Actually, safety as a word is fundamental to us. We're in maybe engineering or manufacturing. Zero harm is critical. It's one of our core values. How can we really make sure that we are thinking about the whole person when we're talking about safety, not just their physical safety, but really ensuring we're supporting psychological health and safety in work environments as well? And also thinking about some of those critical near misses that maybe are not on the physical side of the safety spectrum, but actually looking at health and safety from a psychological perspective of what are these people responsible for in terms of critical functions of the organization, and how are they feeling as they're going into those scenarios? Are they psychologically healthy enough to be responsible, accountable, in control for things that actually affect their own and other people's lives?
Yeah, and it's really tough in those environments that you've mentioned where there is zero harm policy, because there's also, to a degree, a zero kind of failure. I don't want my building and my bridge to be wrong. It has catastrophic knock-on effects. We do a lot of work in nuclear and engineering, and some of those, those instances, and we've seen it as well with healthcare. You know, there's a real challenge where psychological safety is so important for people to share ideas and kind of move against that hierarchy that means that you create safety, literal safety, as well as psychological safety.
Yeah.
But how do you do that when you're at the same time balancing, we can't get anything wrong?
Yes, and that's it, isn't it? It's that critical kind of balance between excellence as a value and always doing the right thing, and having some safety and some flex to be able to make mistakes. But maybe it's more about that human connection. I mean, when I think about some of the impacts of what happens when things do go wrong, and it does come down to an individual, and it's very rare that we actually hear what happened, you know, in terms of that. Obviously, there's different aspects of blame culture in all organizations when people have to be able to prove and investigate what happened when something significant, you know, failed in the organization. And if it came down to a person and a piece of human error, why wasn't the organization looking at covering that base more holistically, so that it wasn't down to one individual? There wasn't kind of a single point of failure at any point. And lots of organizations focus in on that fundamentally all the time. And that's where I'm seeing a real interest in psychological safety through almost like a completely different part of the organizational strategy. Previously, it's been talked about in terms of inclusion, in terms of well-being, very much part of the core people strategy, very much part of a well-being function or an inclusion function, something that's included in the L&D strategy in terms of how we support leaders, managers, people to learn and grow all the time. And now all of a sudden I'm seeing health and safety units, which actually sit sometimes very separately to those HR and L&D functions, really starting to look at, okay, what does psychological safety mean for our organization from a health and safety perspective? And there's a lot of pull there to understand, what does that mean? And I think what that's starting to draw into is what I mentioned before, is that yes, our whole people strategy should be creating psychological safety. When we're focusing people first, we're doing a ton of really fantastic stuff for our people all the time. But do we need a targeted intervention to support our leaders to understand what psych safety is, and how they're responsible for it and what they're not responsible for? So, you know, how much are leaders and managers even responsible for psychological safety? Because we talk a lot about this, you know, there's this almost like this entitlement culture growing of, oh no, I can't speak up because I'm not safe to speak up. But have you tried? How brave are you in terms of stretching the limits, moving out of your comfort zone? And I think there's this really interesting dynamic, again, building the same as it did with wellbeing, the same as with inclusion, around how entitled are we allowing people to be, and how much are we challenging and supporting accountability and responsibility for psychological safety? There's a lot in there. And what do you reckon?
Yeah, no, but I think it touches on something that is really important that I've always wondered. And I think you're right. We talk about it a lot with well-being. You know, we talk a lot about it in terms of team performance and putting too much onus on the leader. Now, not, of course, the leader probably has the majority share of influencing a climate and a culture of psychological safety, of course. But I think there is a balance, and I'm wondering whether maybe we've got some of that wrong, where we're training and putting the emphasis on leaders, and the leadership development's great, and you have to be, you know, here's all your principles of what you need to do to be psychologically safe and inclusive, and all of those things in that box. But we're missing the whole organization, which is, how do you understand and gain clarity if you haven't got clarity, to then have the bravery to step in and contribute based on your unique strengths and what you can truly bring into that organization. That takes guts, that takes resilience. You know, not all of your ideas are going to land first time with a leader. Doesn't mean that the leader's not creating psychological safety, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing, is like, not all ideas are fantastic. They clearly can't be. We can't just sit there and go, oh yes, let's implement that straight away. And I think what you're kind of tapping into, and what I'm starting to kind of see, is that pull back to the fact that people, human beings, if we come right back to our kind of our universal connectors as humans, we like to be seen, we like to be heard, and we like to be kind of recognized and valued for who we are. And obviously strengths really helps with that, because it's so unique. It's like our unique blueprint of who we are as a human. So being able to be ourselves all the time is really important, that authenticity, but being encouraged and supported to stretch and grow in a really positive way and try new things, even if they don't work out, without fear of failure or humiliation for failing or making a mistake, is really, really fundamental. But we know it, don't we? So when we're in a conversation with somebody, and we know, and it's like we are absolutely incredible species to be able to know instantly whether we feel safe with somebody. And it happens in a very short space of time to think to ourselves, is this person listening to me? Are they really thinking about what I'm saying? Do I have the space to even share my ideas with this person? And it's about that, keeping our human switched on as a leader, and as a manager, to be able to people to know that, yeah, you can. And it's such a subtle thing. Doesn't matter what training course we go through. It's a really, really small, subtle thing. And it's so complexly made up of how we're sitting, how we're behaving, how we're reacting and responding. And there's a huge amount of non-verbal communication going on, much harder on a virtual basis to communicate that way. And that's what we're really trying to create there, is that ability for people to go, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I feel like I can be my human self, and I can do it here. And this person is going to help me, regardless of who they are. And that's super, super, like, tiny, but so important, isn't it? It's that feeling. And how do we quantify that feeling? How do we help leaders know what we mean? And I think sometimes the best thing is to think about our own situations, isn't it? And we do a lot of this, obviously, to try and get people to tap into their human experience and learn from their own experience, because they recognize it. So if you think about, when have you felt safe to come up with ideas or to challenge and say, no, we need to do something differently? So you and I have these conversations.
Yeah, all the time.
We do all the time, and I love it. And I talk to people, and actually I tell people all the time, and I say, Ant challenges me all the time. My goodness me, I don't know what that was about. Sometimes we'll have 20 minutes of Ant going, I don't think we should be doing this. I think we should be doing it this way. And I love those conversations. How does it feel to you when you're trying to shape and mold and change direction for the organization?
Yeah, and it's tough, right? Because you want to do well, and you want to kind of have the feedback that you're progressing in the right way and that your idea is the thing, and it's the best thing that anyone's ever heard ever. But who am I? And I think this is really interesting, right? Who am I, and how arrogant would I have to be to show that one idea, that one time, communicated in that space or that moment? And I think this is the human switched on the other way. I think we talk a lot about the human switched on from the leader down, but what about the human switched on the other way? The leader has gone through something this morning, has been back-to-back meetings. There's a lot of conversations at the moment that are really tough for business owners, leaders, that are really challenging. So there's sort of a two-way psychological contract that if my idea hasn't landed the first time, or it didn't feel like it was received in the right way, stay curious and go, why didn't that land? Is there something, or the way that I'm communicating it? Is there something that wasn't clear about my idea? Was it just a rubbish idea? And actually I need to rethink my I think the issue becomes when there isn't two-way communication in that way, and that openness between, and actually also getting feedback from the team, not just the leader. So psychological safety almost becoming a contract with you as a group together, not just me and the leader. And I think that's really, really important. Me going out seeking, hey, I don't think that landed very well. I didn't feel like it was, what can I do here? And can I say that in a different way? Or
yeah, and what you're doing there is you're really owning it, and you're really taking accountability. And I think that's the fundamental thing. And when we talk about having bravery and being bold, that's what we're talking about here, is people taking that accountability. And it's very easy to I'm sitting there imagining that scenario of you going back and talking to other people, and I'm thinking, ooh, alarm bells, like, activist employee groups now all of a sudden coming together around, well, we all want this thing to happen. And that happens in organizations. We've really empowered people so much in the past kind of 5-10 years to really help, not just contribute, but really lead organizations. that it makes it even harder then for leaders and managers to steer back to the strategy and to steer back to what's been decided in terms of the organizational deliverables and the execution that needs to take place. We cannot just simply let everyone do everything they want to do all the time, because it wouldn't be an organization that's functioning well at all. And performance is critical. And I think the thing that I worry about is almost like the big challenge, the issue that we're really grappling with here, is that human beings do not like being judged. We just don't, right? No one likes being judged, but constantly in organizations, you have, and you are, whether it's, explicit or not, you are being judged on your performance in some shape or form whilst you're working for an organization, normally by managers and leaders, sometimes by your team members, and often by your team members as well. But if people are being judged on their performance, is that the fundamental blocker here to people feeling safe at work? Is that they think to themselves, oh, well, if I put myself out here, they'll think I want another job, or they'll think I don't want to do what I'm doing at the moment, when actually I do. I just had a different idea of doing it, in a new way. And I think there's some people that really struggle with that worry of, oh, will I lose my job, or will I not get a promotion, or will I not get an opportunity because I've been bold enough to say what I think and it's different to what the organization is doing? And so how can we overcome that? Because, the performance cycle is in organizations for a very good reason. We cannot have people who aren't doing what they're being paid for on a daily basis, or the organizations, again, wouldn't function. How do we overcome this big kind of issue with being able to not feel judged, but at the same time knowing that is just part of the working contract?
Yeah, and for me personally, I think it's to do with time. The fact that no one has any of it, and when you're back-to-back meetings, your kind of psychological capital, your resources for kind of staying emotionally in tuned to the conversation and emotionally aware of how yourself is coming across, how others are maybe responding to your message, but also the emotional ability to not take things personally. I'm putting an idea out there that I'm not putting my identity on the table, because that's more probably for belonging conversation, right? If I'm expressing who I am as an individual, not fear for my ideas, I think that's a subtle difference between maybe trust and psychological safety, or belonging and psychological safety. I think psychological safety is very much to do with my idea being put in the middle, and do I feel safe for stepping into that space? So how can we create that space, but also how do we keep it there and stay resilient to it, even when things might not go our way?
It's a really complex issue, and it's overlapped with lots of different things, hasn't it? So if we look at the stretch that's happened with managers and leaders' roles in the last few years as a result of the pandemic, many organizations focused very much on supporting people's well-being and their mental health through that period. Over the last year, I have seen that all being reevaluated and made much more efficient in terms of budget spent on mental health and well-being across organizations everywhere. So people are sensing that. They're sensing things are changing, things are being pared down, things are being combined to be more effective and more efficient. Now we're kind of through the worst of that situation. And maybe that's the fear, is that people are feeling that, the climate's changing across the world, lots of different markets and industries. There's this real flux happening. There's in certain countries, obviously, we've got changes of government taking place. And, it's a real picture that nothing's going back to how it was before the kind of global pandemic, and that managers and leaders, we often have to start back at the basics again. And there's some basics around the performance life cycle that people need to have in place, and that's being put in place a lot from what I can see this year in organizations. People are kind of trying to come back to those performance conversations and balance it with well-being now. But how much is that kind of, as I said, kind of worrying people around, well, hang on, how does this work? And particularly for those new generations who are entering the workforce for the first time, they've not experienced what it was like 5 years ago. How is that feeling to them? Does it feel like this is all new to the organization, or is this just a refresh? What's happening? And how are managers feeling about that? How do managers feel confident to actually deliver on the basics as well as the well-being and mental health part? How do they support both and ensure that they're meeting the needs of the organization's performance and their people on a daily basis, when it's just stretched so much more. And we're seeing, you know, I hate using the word burnout because it's just so prevalent everywhere at the moment, but we are seeing people really struggling. There's so much to do, that where do you focus? And that's when I like to just come back to, like, what's the human basis here? When you're having a conversation, when you're with someone, how can you use your strengths and your unique kind of approach as a human being to make that person feel comfortable, safe, happy, well, and able to perform?
Yeah. And if that's even possible, because again, it could be that person's experience that isn't the case, and that work isn't a safe environment because of a previous manager or a previous team, or there's all sorts of kind of expectations, I suppose, that you bring along with you. And so I guess what I'd like to see organizations doing more, and I guess some of the work that we've been doing more recently, which is around, okay, how do we really equip these teams and these leaders to go and have these really in-depth conversations about this stuff proactively, whether it's well-being, whether it's around leaning into your unique strengths and discovering your strengths. Because if you don't have clarity and you don't have understanding around your strengths, how can I feel confident enough and have the self-efficacy to jump into a potentially open door that might be psychologically safe, maybe? I need to step into that. And unless I have those examples, so how am I equipping those teams and those leaders to just every week, as part of their practice, a part of their operating model, how they interact with each other, how are they praising the fact that someone's just come to the table with an idea, no matter what it was. And also then, how is the leader equipped to have a good feedback conversation of going, hey, look, I love your idea. Love that you came with that idea. I don't think it's quite aligned to the strategy because of X, Y, Z, and we need to maybe steer in this direction but I love it. Keep going. Maybe think about it in this different way. Those in the moment coaching conversations. And I think in the world of AI, this is going to become even more important, because you can prep an idea till the nth degree with the amount of data and knowledge that you'll be able to access. To a degree, you'd have already maybe had a coach, an AI manager coach, who's talked you through how to communicate it. But the human, I'm in the room with my colleagues, that is the real skill I think that organizations are going to have to double down on in the next 5, 10, 50 years, to be honest. Which is a really interesting, I think we're at a really interesting moment in time for that.
Well, and it's absolutely fundamental, isn't it, and critical that we know who we are as humans, and then we go and do that on purpose. Because I just constantly keep saying this thing about it, unless we know what our human differentiators are in this new world that is emerging, we won't be able to stay true to who we are. And we need to be able to really tap into that and know that in any given scenario, we know why we're there and what we're contributing. And we are doing that on purpose. And so basically, we're elevating our subconscious to a different level. And there's been work going on for years on emotional intelligence. And obviously, we have that at the core of all of our design as well. And we know that emotional intelligence develops with age naturally through experience. And as human beings, it's almost about really trying to accelerate and amplify that and know what it is, so much so that we can just be really skilled at being human. And that seems to be the prevalence piece, as well as helping people prioritize. In organizations, I think there's quite a bit of a difficulty at the moment. In January, we always see this big rush to the strategy and the goal setting approach. And I do think it's quite funny sometimes in people first organizations who have a value of people first, but then go and tell everybody exactly what's happening.
Oh, have we lost you, Alex? Or is it just you've lost me? Could be that you've lost me, but I'll continue just in case. Although you're back. You're back. There we go. I think you're back. What I was going to say, because I'll move us on just a little bit, but the what can we do when psychological safety isn't at the senior level? Sorry, Alex, you are back now. There we go. I was actually just going through one of the comments because I think it's an interesting build on what you were just talking about there. which is like, how do we, as a middle manager level, when you haven't got the psychological safety at the top and you're constantly barraging against feeling safe yourself, how do you then go and create safety in your team? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and it is, and you know, I'm hearing this a lot, is that, you know, there's a lot of pressure on organizations this year to really perform. We're seeing organizations dealing with just immense amount of change, and they've got the leadership in place, they've got the structures and processes in place to deal with it, but there is pressure on. And it feels like pressure from investors, pressure from shareholders, for the senior leaders to really deliver this year. And that's fantastic, right? We like some kind of pressure, and some good healthy stress and competition is great. But what happens when that means that people don't listen? And I am hearing this in organizations where I'm talking to people. They've got great people strategies in place, but it's almost like some of the senior leaders trample a little bit all over that in terms of how they behave. And they're difficult to engage with and to challenge, and to be able to create the opportunity to say, can we have a conversation about how this is impacting? And from past experience, one of the best ways of doing that is obviously gathering data and being able to show a picture back to individuals of how their person is, and how their performance and their interactions are actually impacting the organization negatively. Because most senior leaders have a fantastically positive intent. They really want to do a good job. And when they feel like, or suddenly see something that's a blind spot, they're normally very humble enough to be able to recognize and go, oh, wow, okay, we need to realign and get back on track here and do something differently. So it's like, how do we find those really kind of those nuggets, those opportunities, the inroads to be able to have those conversations? Is it allegiances and alliances with other stakeholders that can influence those senior leaders? Is it data that we can get either from a people survey or some kind of pulse check or a focus group, or something that you can present as evidence, as information to share to people what the impact of senior leader actions is in organizations? And how do we rewrite the stories? So there's one thing here as well about rewriting stories in organizations that can be really important, because sometimes things happen in large organizations. So for example, someone might be exited, and then someone the next week might be exited. And for whatever reason, it's confidential and no one's allowed to know what really happened. But if those people happens to be people that people loved and in senior leadership roles, it starts to create that kind of internal story of why. And people make assumptions. And as we know, conversations can create a story that is sometimes not necessarily true. But what that creates then is almost this this legacy in the organization around, well, if that's how things work here, and actually it's not necessarily true. It might have been a complete blip. It might have been something that no one was allowed to share. How do organizations deal with that? How do we confront it? How do we change the story? I think that's really hard.
Well, and I think also the natural, when you're together as a if you're not involved in those conversations, if you're maybe not at that level, or you're not involved and you're slightly outside of it, there's immediately a lack of transparency. Not necessarily because there is actually a communication issue, there might be, but not necessarily. It's just on need to know basis. It's not part of your role or what have you. But if you knew that person, and those are the sorts of things I think. When I start to see trust being thrown into the psychological safety, is it any different to trust? What's the link to belonging? I think honesty, competency. Do I believe in this leader that I'm with, and do I trust that they're being honest as much as they can be? Those are two really powerful things. Do I rely on them? How can I rely on them? Have they been honest in the past? And overall, are they pretty sound? When I've needed time off, or when I've had a human issue, how have they responded? Those are sorts of questions that maybe you start to ask yourself that then tell you maybe the bigger picture. So I genuinely think there's too much emphasis on psychological safety and not enough emphasis on the respect, the transparency of communication, the honesty, the difficult conversations. I still don't think we're doing anywhere near enough practice and creating the safe space for practice around those skills, because ultimately psychological safety for me is an output. it's not an input necessarily. And that's kind of what we've tried to do, I know, on our couple of workshops that we run, whether it's for leaders or whether it's for the teams and the individuals and the whole organization as a whole. I think backing into some of those really core skills and giving space to practice those is critical.
Yeah, and I think, there's, I want to come on to a couple of questions here that we've had just come up recently around leaders creating insecure or unsafe spaces. But just wanted to add into what you're saying there. And I think Mike's going to add in a QR code here for us. But we've done both, haven't we? We've kind of looked at creating the basics of a human management kind of approach, so that people have got the basic conversations in a human way to have with people, so that we've got all areas covered in the organization more generally, so that no one's missing the critical part. But also some of those targeted interventions where organizations are really struggling with psychological safety right now, and they want to elevate it to leaders or managers' attention and create a conversation about it so that people take notice, because we know that matters. It happens, we had a huge impact in the D&I space, huge impact in wellbeing space by bringing it to the forefront of people's attention, because there's so much going on. And one great way of doing that is offering people really good learning around it and the opportunity to discuss and debate it. So you've got a QR code here that leads you directly to our targeted interventions. If anyone's interested in those, in large organizations, happy to offer demos. So please get in touch. But I did want to come onto this conversation that is really developing in the comments here, and we kind of keep coming at it, and I want to come at it a bit stronger, really. Lorna's talking about, what if the leaders actually create this unsafe space as a competitive edge? What if the senior leaders are actually, aware that they're creating this situation? And I think this is fascinating. And so from my kind of experience working internally in large organizations, it's a minefield in terms of wondering how to manage your stakeholders when you have essentially a cultural shift that you're supporting in organizations, helping evolve a culture towards something that's more human, that's more planet focused, that's more positive, I guess, in terms of the impact on the world of work. And you see behaviours and negative things happening. What can you do? How can you empower yourself to actually keep focused on the right things that you know are going to make the biggest difference, and try and create a culture that doesn't accept some of this negative behaviour? And I think it's possible. It takes time, though, so nothing happens overnight. But one of the things that I find really interesting is when you find significant influencers in the organization. And I talk about influencers here very differently than I talk about champions, right? So we've had a whole kind of focus on champions for quite some time in terms of supporting champions of D&I, supporting champions of wellbeing to lead cultural evolutions in organizations. And some employee resource groups have done those pieces too. But actually, I often see that those populations don't have a lot of influence in terms of strategic change or overall culture. And there's normally hidden people, the people I call the unusual suspects, who are the influencers in organization that we need to get their attention and we need to get them involved. And in one organization I was working with recently, I was talking to one of these influencers, and I knew instantly, because he was asking all the right questions about psychological safety. How would I know as a leader if I've created psychological safety in my team? I was like, bingo, he's very aware of what he's trying to do here, really wanting to understand. He's saying, people are telling me this, but how do I really know? He's really challenging himself and his own knowledge around these pieces. But he also had quite strategic influence at senior leadership level to do things his own way. And I talked to him about one technique that I often share with people. I'm very happy to share with everyone here today. And I challenge you all to go and do this. If you have an opportunity at some kind of company communications event, whether it's a town hall or just talking to a department, if you have a real people first strategy, let's put the people first. Ask them their questions up front. I can't believe how many organizations start with, this is what the organization wants to do. This is what the organization is asking of you. And at the end, you can ask some questions. But actually, let's just control those questions and make sure you ask them in advance. So we'll give you a survey so you can ask questions in advance about something you've not even heard yet. And we'll decide whether we ask your questions in that forum or not, just to make sure we're controlling the whole conversation. And the feeling is not one of safety. It's one of, I have to ask the right question, so I may as well not ask one. And it's a dampening down. It's a, let's not speak, let's not have a conversation. Whereas if you flip that, if you really are people and human first, and you flip it on its head and you say, do you know what? Let's start this whole town hall, this company conversation with questions. What are people thinking? What are people feeling right now? What matters to you right now? And me as a senior leader, I have some information I want to share with you, a business update, a performance focus, a new plan, but I'm going to tailor what I'm saying to your questions, because I want to make sure it matters to where your head's at right now. What are you thinking? What are you doing? And it transforms how people feel about the organization when you are a spokesperson and an influencer for that organization. Anyway, so I've spoken to this influencer about this. He's going to try it this month. I can't wait to hear how it goes. He's got 200 people coming together. He's starting with questions, and the consistency to create the space and the safety for people to know that actually that's what happened last month, and he's going to do it again next month. I might ask a question this time because he actually was really open and it was really helpful. So it's about that consecutive consistency, continuing to do something so that people develop that trust in you and they know that your integrity is there too. And that for me kind of is, I think, is a good demonstration, a good example of how can you create psychological safety when maybe people are working against it in the organization. You know, invariably in large organizations, not everyone's going to be on the same trajectory, are they?
Yeah, no, all incredible. Like, you hear that in every conversation that you would ever speak to of a senior leader, but there's the nuances that person's obviously gone into that helps you go, well, that's someone who's taking this seriously. They don't just know it because they've seen it on LinkedIn. They instinctively are curious about it and really trying to role model it and bring it to life. And I think that's the subtle difference of finding those real champions, and those are great leaders, right? That is the role of a great leader.
That's right. You know, that's we found quite a lot of success actually with the human leadership program around this, having a big impact on psychological safety, and that's why we've created that human manager program as well, because the human leaders piece tends to sit at senior leadership level and middle management, but actually we need managers, supervisors, everyone to really think about all the touch points and interactions they have with the employee ordinarily as part of their work, as well as the layered on top general check-ins that people can have, and really think about how can they have that consistency so that there's integrity. I'm hearing here as well about people sharing that their leaders kind of flip-flopping back and forth and change. And consistency matters. It really has an impact. So we often see leaders who are very kind of extroverted, very expressive, getting really excited about a strategy, and then actually they have the same kind of excited or maybe fearful reaction when things don't go so well as well. And actually there's more of a kind of calm and consistent approach that really supports people to feel comfortable. So it's about really helping leaders think about their impact. How are their words really being heard and felt by other people, and their presence? Because I think sometimes leaders just don't have enough feedback about how people view them as a leader. And often 360 feedback processes, if they're anonymous, they haven't got the opportunity to really dig into that and understand what's behind it. What were they talking about in that comment? What are they referring to? And the detail is missing, which means that there's a huge amount of learning missing as well. And for us, I think it's that peer review, peer social learning, where people can bring challenges and be open and vulnerable and talk about, actually, I heard that last week, and I heard something different from my team about how they experienced that meeting. Being able to hear and learn from your peers is so much more beneficial than any academics or any kind of psychologists kind of adding in their theories and models, as we like to do. But yeah, I think there's some fantastic questions coming through. Please do pop your questions in the comments. We'll try to get to the key themes that are coming from those, as well as respond to any pieces afterwards if there's any requests for information. I've covered quite a lot here today, and yes, and I really enjoy talking about this topic, mainly because it really is fundamental. As you said, it is an output of an awful lot of work that people are doing. But there is that need, as I said, to just bring it a little bit closer to the focused attention when people are worried about attrition. You know, I'm hearing a lot about retention this year being absolutely fundamental. People are not necessarily growing their teams. They might be growing their product portfolio or growing how they're working in different markets. But lots of people are trying to retain their core talent, keeping people in roles. But people want to feel, as I said, seen, heard, valued, recognised. And we need to ensure that that is part of the organisational conversation. And people who like, you know, to focus on a competitive advantage, even if it's negatively, they do look at their competitors. So being able to demonstrate what another organisation in competition is doing in this space is sometimes also an opportunity to influence people to do something slightly differently.
Yeah. Do you know what I've kind of been thinking about this recently, and I think if we were honest, we'd probably say that 80 to 90% of people, if you met them outside of work, when, you know, their emails aren't filling up, they're not under pressure to hit a deadline, when they're being constantly hounded for KPI improvement and, you know, performance and pace and the uncertainty in which they're trying to do and navigate all of those things, I think if you took all of that away, you probably would have someone that largely creates a degree of safety in being open to things and learning new things. So I guess the question is sometimes a little bit more process oriented, or not necessarily process, that's probably the wrong word. It's more kind of the team ways of working, or the ways of working and the psychological contract that you have with each other. This is going to be fast paced. I can't hear everyone's ideas. Can you prepare this in advance or send it to me and I'll have a look? Can you make sure you cover these points? You know, there's little habits that you can probably create as a leader and as a team that kind of, I guess, just create a little stepping stone into psychological safety, rather than just striving for psychological safety as this perfect thing that we're just never going to get to in this world of work. I don't think. And that's why we're starting to talk about bravery, because you need to be met halfway to a certain degree. And I do love the word consistency, because there is a lot at the moment where I sense amongst our clients when I speak to senior leaders, when you speak to you know, HR and L&D, and they say one thing, you speak to the senior leaders and they go, but I've been trying this for months, but I tripped up once. Someone said something, and it was a bad day, and I just, you know, how do they get it back? That's the question. It's how do they get it back? So yeah, the consistency is really tough. So how do you create those little habits and those skills to rebuild and reshape quite quickly, because we are moving at pace? It's tough, but I think most people want to get it right. That's the hard thing.
They do, and you're right. You know, it's that continuous push, and people do know if you try really hard, they can tell if you're trying. And it's okay to be vulnerable as a leader, but it's just very interesting hearing you talking about those systems and processes and habits, because you do that really well. So there's some live feedback for you. And you create it for everybody, and it's really, really fantastic, because exactly that, like, I can rely on, and that's the kind of the integrity pieces. I can rely on knowing that I will get a little list of bullet points afterwards going, we need to make sure we do this next time and this next time, or have this agenda topic or this piece, because it does help to create that safety and that space. And that's what we're talking about here, safe spaces. You know, it's not just the individual accountability for creating psych safety and individual conversations. It's about that space, the space we occupy, the space we choose to occupy. What are our knowledge, skills, and strengths that create a space where we are recognized, valued, and heard? And how can we then take the accountability for creating bold ideas in the right way, connecting the right people, being strategic in our stakeholder influencing? You know, organizations are complex places, particularly large organizations. I'm hearing some people here talking about the differences between leaders who work for organizations where there may be shareholders or investors versus business owners that actually have a leadership role within their organization as well, and the different impacts on people when, you know, it is down to essentially business owners, and I feel this myself, it's your livelihood. The rest of your life is tied up into that business. There is so much connection into that it feels incredibly personal, and it's almost impossible to take that away. So it's very interesting to hear how, you know, some of those different types of leaders in different types of organizations respond differently to psychosafety. And I would say certainly kind of trends, large organizations tend to have sophisticated people strategies, normally because they can afford to. Smaller organizations tend to take a while to kind of catch up with those, almost wait and see what other people do first. They're not always the pioneers in that space, and try to you know, be fast to follow on things that make a difference to performance. And it's really, that is almost like recognizing that, yes, people first is fundamental, but the organization needs to perform to be able to have people as a people first strategy. So it's a fundamental to business survival and to support people is that the business is performing, and it's that fine balance that leaders struggle with. Believe me, I see it time and time again, have done for 25 years. And Sylvia's had a couple of great questions in here, giving feedback to leaders, potentially not really changing or taking that feedback on board.
The untouchables. I like
that. The untouchables. In exit interviews, nothing changes. And it's really just, I guess, learning to understand what influence does exist in the organization. And from my experience, certainly, you know, active stakeholder influencing around those people is working out who really influences them, and using different strategies and different routes to get to them has only been the way I've seen work. But I've also worked with leaders who will never change, and I've chosen not to work with them. So, you know, there's certain different ways of looking at different issues in organizations around psychosafety. And I think it is much harder sometimes for smaller organizations, particularly when you're working directly with business owners who essentially are doing every job in the company. How can they, you know, actively understand all the complexities of every single part of the organization's strategy and get it right? And, you know, they don't always have the benefit of the doubt either. Yeah, you know, if they get it wrong, how do they change that story? How can we support them with different systems and processes to remove almost the reliance and the influence that maybe they have in particular areas? So I think we're getting kind of close to the end of our LinkedIn Live today. It's been a fantastic global live event, running right the way across all regions of the world. And we will be replaying for those people who are fast asleep, hopefully enjoying the nighttime across the other side of the world. And love to answer any questions and comments. We've got a QR code here that takes you directly to our targeted interventions around psychosafety. If you're interested in discussing those with us, we'd love to talk to you about the work we're doing with organizations around these areas, and what we can do to support. There's also a 10% offer discount on at the moment, which I think is important considering the situation most organizations are in, looking at their budgets and their spend for the year. So do take us up on that, and get in touch for a conversation. We'd love to talk to you. And we'd love to hear more conversations about this. Share with us in your comments. Connect with us on our LinkedIn page. We've got a Facebook page, obviously a YouTube channel, as well as our Spotify channel with a variety of different audio and podcast episodes on. So please do have a listen in. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And I love chatting to you. I know you're off for the next couple of weeks, months, traveling. And I hope you enjoy being in Australia and the other parts of the world.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to having more conversations when you return, but I'll be probably back next month, I imagine, with someone from the team, probably Dane. So we'll be talking about other hot topics and trends that are affecting the workplace at the moment and supporting a focus on humanising the world of work. So thank you for joining us. Really lovely to be having such a vibrant conversation. And thank you, everyone, for your contribution and comments. It's been really great to have this conversation, and I hope anyone listening back will also get in touch and share your thoughts and ideas. Thank you, Ant. It's been fantastic.
Thank you. No, it's been really good, and I will be tuning in on Spotify for I think the next one's around like human first, and is it really people first strategy, and how do we decipher what's real and what isn't? And I think that's a really important and an interesting one to tuck into. We've got some coming up on AI based on some of the work that we've been doing. So yeah, I'll be listening in. don't you?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next time.